The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. A £15 billion merger between two of the UK's biggest mobile networks could be about to get the green lights. America votes. We'll be looking at how the markets are doing as polling day gets underway. Plus, Boeing workers end their 7-week strike as they accept a 38% pay rise. Very good morning on this Tuesday. Welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Now, a £15 billion merger between two of the biggest mobile networks here in the UK could finally be given the green light. The Competition and Markets Authority says the mergers of Vodafone and Three has the potential to be pro-competitive if they stick to their commitments to invest in the country's infrastructure. The watchdog had previously warned that the deal, which would bring 27 million customers under a single provider, could see tens of millions of mobile phone users pay more. Well, let's speak to Stuart McIntosh. He's the inquiry chair at the Competition and Markets Authority. Very good morning to you, Stuart. I suppose the obvious first question is, what's changed?
Well, I'm not sure that anything much has changed. I think as we said when we issued our provisional findings in September, we could see there being concerns to do with the upward pressure on pricing as you've described. But we did also say then that we could see potentially significant benefits arising from this merger as a result of their ability to combine networks, upgrade those networks and roll out 5G much more quickly than might otherwise happen. And what we said at the time was that we would then be considering what measures we could take that potentially would allow those benefits to be realised, but at the same time address the competition concerns we had, particularly with regard to prices increasing. And the document today sets out what those are, and they're essentially around a legally binding commitment on the parties to roll out their network and upgrade their network as they've said they would. But at the same time, put in place some shorter-term measures to ensure that there's protection for customers in respect to price increases in the short term, and also to ensure that wholesale providers like Leica and Lebara and ID Mobile continue to be able to get good wholesale terms to compete in the retail market. So it's an evolution rather than a change, I think.
You say that, though, it is the Competition and Markets Authority. Many people will ask, how is it good to go from kind of 4 big providers, if you like, down to 3? How's that good for competition?
Well, obviously what we have done is we've looked at the way competition is working today, and we've looked at how it might evolve with sort of network investments that we're describing. And I think that what we see is the opportunity and the ability to make those investments is going to put pressure on others in the industry to respond, to innovate with their own services, to invest in upgrading more rapidly than perhaps they've done in the past. And while there will undoubtedly be some reduction in competitive pressure because we're moving from 4 to 3, we've had to look at the other side of the coin and try and understand, are there going to be substantial benefits here which will accrue to customers, but which will also safeguard competition in the longer term? And our view at the moment, and we have not yet taken a final decision, is that those countervailing factors are more than sufficient both to preserve the sort of competition we've seen today and potentially in the longer term boost competition.
And there is a problem here, isn't there, fundamentally, Stuart, in the sense that you're in central London there. I'm often in central London too. My mobile phone network connects, or seems to at least, but I don't get any coverage. I mean, we're meant to be in an era of 5G, and yet extraordinarily in London, and I'm sure it's true of other cities as well, you just don't get good mobile phone coverage.
Well, potentially that's one of the things that the investment programme set up by Vodafone and Three may well address. As part of the network commitment, there would be a requirement placed on them to upgrade all of the cell sites which they would retain across the UK, which would be somewhere between 25 and 30,000. But working with Ofcom, there would be specified requirements for upgrading those sites, both in urban areas and in rural areas, and in different areas depending on their traffic mix. So what that should mean is that, and this should begin to become apparent during the first year or so following the merger, is that yourself and other users particularly those who are on the Vodafone and Three networks, would find that they get better coverage, they get more consistent coverage, and increasingly they'd be able to enjoy faster speeds. And we think that that's going to drive further competitive stimulus for others in the market to respond.
Are you then offering essentially, if this does go ahead, and we're still waiting for the final clearance, are you offering those current customers of Vodafone and Three that they're not going to see significant bill increases in the years to come?
Well, what we have said is that we recognise that this network programme, if it is initiated, is going to take some time in order to be implemented. But we do anticipate that within 2 to 3 years, significant progress will be being made. What we don't want to happen in the interim is for that to be a period during which the reduction from 4 to 3 results in upward pressure on prices. So what we are proposing to do, and again, we're consulting on this today, is proposing to cap certain of Vodafone and Three's tariffs. And we'll select those tariffs based on their popularity, how far they represent or seem to represent very good value for money, and looking across a range of data allowances. And those prices would be capped over the next 3 years. I say 3 years, but in truth, it will be linked to the deliverables in respect of some of the network upgrade programs. So if that slips, and we do not anticipate it should, there would be slightly a longer period in respect of those tariff controls, or those price controls.
Okay, and just one final question while I've got you. It's something else the Competition and Markets Authority are looking at. I'm just wondering if we had any progress on it, which is into dynamic pricing and particularly what happened with the Oasis tickets. Is that still an ongoing inquiry?
Well, my role at the CMA is to be a member of the panel and an inquiry chair, and I oversee and help steer merger inquiries on behalf of the CMA. I regret to say I have no involvement whatsoever with regard to dynamic pricing, and I'm not a member of the CMA executive, so I fear that I'm going to have to push you in their direction if you want to have that question answered. I can't help you with that. Well, I apologise.
I can always try, but we are expecting a decision on this in December.
Yes. The 7th of December is the statutory deadline for the decision on this merger case.
OK, Stuart, really appreciate your time this morning. That's Stuart McIntosh there from the Competition and Markets Authority. Thank you for joining us. Let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the day's stories now. And Boeing workers voted to end the 7-week strike, accepting a 38% wage increase over the next 4 years. According to the Bank of America, the strike had been costing the airline around $50 million a day. It's thought uncertainty ahead of last month's budget, coupled with rising energy prices, spooked high street shoppers. According to the British Retail Consortium and KPMG, retail sales were up just 0.6% year on year in October. That compares to a 2.6% increase during the same period last year. Fashion took the biggest hit, with the unusually mild weather delaying winter purchases. Shares in the UK asset manager Schroders fell 12% this morning. It reported net outflows of client funds of £2.3 billion for the third quarter. It was driven in part by market volatility in China, hitting demand for its joint venture funds. The new chief executive, Richard Oldfield, is due to take over later this month. And don't forget, you can get more on that and indeed all the rest of the money news. All you need to do is scan that QR code on your screen for the Sky News Money Block. Whether you're on Three or Vodafone or indeed any other provider. Now, energy leaders are gathering in Abu Dhabi this week as the industry faces increasing challenges amid the continuing tension in the Middle East. And all eyes today, of course, will be on the United States and the outcome of that big election and potentially massive implications for the energy sector. And joining me now from Abu Dhabi is Daniel Yergin, who's the vice chairman at the credit ratings company S&P Global and a leading advisor in energy and economic sectors, as well as a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. A long CV indeed, Daniel. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, what are you and the others in Abu Dhabi trying to achieve at this week-long summit?
I think the main goal here is to try and understand the direction of energy markets, what's happening, how the energy transition is unfolding, and whether it's going to be geopolitics that drives the oil market or whether it's going to be supply and demand that drives the oil market. And depending on which it is, you'll get a very different outcome in terms of price.
Well, let's look at the market. We still can't get away from oil when it comes to global security with energy. And that's been buffeted around, hasn't it, a lot over the last year, 18 months, given events in the Middle East.
Yes, but it's interesting. The oil price is not really reflecting that at this point. It's no longer willing to price in risk if something doesn't happen. So the oil market right now is really dominated by two things. One is a relatively weakness in Chinese economy and waiting to see how the stimulus plays out. And the other is a continuing growth of production. The United States now is at 13.5 million barrels a day, which is by far larger than the traditional leaders, which are Saudi Arabia and Russia. So it's really a different global market with a different psychology and a rebalancing of the geopolitics of the oil market.
It is, and obviously things are changing, aren't they, when it comes to the balance of global supply of energy, and how much are the old fossil fuels still important to global energy security, and how much is the green energy sources, wind, solar, starting to tip that balance, Daniel?
Do you mind if I shock you? So basically, over 80% of world energy today is from what you called old fuels, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons. So that is mainly what the world operates on. Wind and solar are growing very fast. Solar particularly because it's inexpensive. That's the electricity sector primarily, but it's still a relatively small part of the overall mix. And sometimes people forget those big numbers when they just focus on one part of the market.
Well, let's talk about energy security. You know, we've clearly still got the war in Ukraine. As you say, we've got a stimulus package in China that doesn't seem to have necessarily shifted the dial as some had expected. And we've got a US. What I'm trying to say here, where is, energy security globally?
Well, I think that the Ukraine war drove home that energy security remains a primary concern. And while the UK may go on one direction in terms of its offshore oil policy, you see the Chancellor of Germany, which is a very green country, going to Kazakhstan recently to assure oil supply. He went to Senegal, he went to Canada trying to get natural gas. So I think that leaders still recognize that energy security is important. It comes and goes depending upon events, but you can't get away from energy security, because if you do, the world will come back and it will bite you.
Well, let's talk about one of those events, of course, the US election that's currently underway in the United States. What impact, for example, would a second Trump term have on that? He's talked about, drilling more, fracking more. Would Donald Trump be good for global energy security?
Well, it's on the one hand, he talks about more supply, but let me point out that it's under Joe Biden that you've had the biggest increase in U.S. oil production. The other thing, of course, that I'm sure you've been talking about it is what a regime of tariffs would do to global trade, what it would do to prices, what it would do to inflation, what it would do to overall trade. And that is, I think, the big uncertainty, one of the big global economic uncertainties that hangs on the result of this election today, which will probably be determined by a relatively few number of people in those key battleground states. How many young men show up who like to follow Elon Musk, and how many women will show up who are Harris voters. So those are the blocks to watch, and turnout will be really, really critical. We'll see in the hours that come in terms of determining the outcome of this election.
And Daniel, how much, you talked about it there, didn't you, the potential for tariffs. How, is it wrong to say, devastating would that be for the global economy?
Well, I think it would certainly take us away. It will be the end of a 30-year era of globalization we've had, in which there have been pretty good trade flows. It's not. It will, and tariffs then invite retaliation. So we don't know really what Donald Trump would do, but he said he likes tariffs. He says, in fact, he says he loves tariffs, and I think that's something that causes a lot of concern, and would get us back and might get us back into an inflationary period, because costs of everything would go up. So, hold on.
And just two final questions, if I may. First of all, just on us here in the UK, we've got a new Labour government. We've just had a significant budget. Externally, where you are and in the United States, what's the sense of Britain, its place in the world, its economy, its kind of willingness to do business?
I think people have been watching that budget very carefully to see what its signals are, and is it a pro-growth budget? And from what I've been reading and hearing and talking to people, there's some concern about that. I mean, what's really important is to get investment, to get people to feel confident in investment. And of course, the other thing is that Britain is a trading nation, and so tariffs would be certainly a problem for Britain as it redefines its new place in the world economy.
And Daniel, of course, I cannot help but ask you this final question, is just, what is your sense? You know, you're a man in the know, you're a man who talks to a lot of people. What's your sense of how the next 24 hours are going to play out? Are you willing, we know it's a tight race, to stake who might win the US presidential election?
Well, I remember when I was here in 2016, I went to sleep thinking Hillary Clinton was president, woke up and find that Donald Trump is president. So I think we're now in a state where everybody seems to be holding their breath. And it's been quite amazing to just see the high energy level, these two candidates going down right to the line and fighting for every vote that they can get, getting the turnout there. And it's just that focus on turnout. So, I mean, it's, maybe a day, but we may also not know the results until Wednesday or Thursday or even till Saturday, because they don't count the absentee ballots in Pennsylvania until after the polls are closed. I think the other thing is that both sides are poised, if it's a close election, for a lot of litigation. And that might mean that the uncertainty persists for some time. And that would not be a good message in terms of global security. And it would certainly not be a good message for the global economy.
Fascinating stuff. We'll all be watching, of course. Daniel, thank you so much indeed for your time this morning. Really appreciate it. Daniel Yergin, the Vice Chairman of the credit ratings agency S&P Global. Now, let's bring you up to date with some of the other business stories on this Tuesday. And operating profits of Primark have jumped 53% to £1.1 billion in the year to mid-September. UK sales were up 1% on 12 months ago. Bosses of its parent company, Associated British Foods, said they're expecting a good Christmas. The Japanese video game maker Nintendo says its profits fell by some 60% in the first half of this year. The company saw shrinking demand for its Switch games console, with sales down to 4.7 million units from the 6.8 million it saw in the same period a year earlier. And a House of Lords committee inquiry has found that theft from shops is not being tackled properly. In a letter to the policing minister, the committee added that the word shoplifting was outdated and trivialised what it said was the serious organised nature of an increasing element of shop theft. The inquiry finds, and wait for it, more than 449,000 incidents of shoplifting were reported to the police in the year up until March 2024. That is a 30% increase on the previous year. Quite extraordinary statistic. Right, we'll take a quick break on Business Live. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, though, we'll be looking at how the market's doing on this big election day. The FTSE up just a little this morning. We'll have all the details in just a couple of minutes.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we are going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
Now, freedom!
There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes, win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
Join our team stateside
As we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
with full reaction and comprehensive analysis guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night Live.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's have a look at those markets in a little bit more detail. And of course, traders are gearing up for this knife-edge US election. The S&P 500 and Dow both closed down slightly yesterday ahead of voting today. In Asia, share prices surged on the Chinese markets as investors anticipated moves by Beijing for a bit more stimulus to boost the world's second largest economy. The Hang Seng was up more than 2%. In Europe, a cautious start this morning with stocks opening pretty flat. As you can see, this is the current state of affairs. Not that much movement. Here, the FTSE 100 has risen ever so slightly in early trading, just up 0.06%. Schroders, though, has dragged it down a bit, as it fell more than 13% following warnings of £10 billion worth of outflows amid fears of that slowdown in China. Meanwhile, ASOS was down 7.9% as the online retailer revealed its full-year revenue results had missed expectations. So quite a lot there. On the currencies, the pound is up against the dollar again today and a fraction against the euro. And as we can see there with Brent crude oil, it is up again a little bit at $75 a barrel. Let's speak to James Dudgeon, he's fund manager at Artemis Investment Management. Very good morning to you, James. I suppose we are all in this game, aren't we, of watching and waiting?
Absolutely. Really feels like the calm before the storm today, doesn't it? I mean, we had a bit of that yesterday, but certainly today is before the big election tonight. Although whether it's just tonight or tomorrow, this is likely to drag on for a couple of days if previous elections are anything to go by.
And what's the concern, James? What are markets hoping doesn't happen, if you like?
Absolutely. I think if we look at what's been happening over the last couple of months, the market has started to price in a Trump victory. We've seen that in terms of domestic share prices, financial share prices, and even Treasury bond yields, which have been going up in the last couple of months. So what's the market fearful of? We think the most likely negative outcome is actually a Democratic sweep, a Harris victory in a Democratic sweep, mainly because of the outlook for corporate tax rises. Under a Trump administration, you likely extend those tax cuts through 2025 and even potentially lower them if they have a Republican sweep. Whereas on the Democratic side, there's likely to be an increase in corporate tax rates. And that just mechanically leads to a lower S&P earnings number. And so we think that's the most negative outcome for markets.
Is there concern, though, about tariffs, a potential trade war? That could be a big drag, couldn't it, on the global economy if Donald Trump wins?
Absolutely could be. I think knowing exactly what would happen and what has been said are not necessarily the same things. We've also seen a bit of this movie before in 2016. And the reality is it's very much a subsector discussion rather than an overall market discussion for the US economy.
I mean,
there are some areas. On you go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it is fascinating, isn't it, that irrespective of whether Donald Trump has been in the White House or Joe Biden, and even with a global pandemic, the American economy has remained incredibly resilient over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. I mean, it has huge natural advantages, a huge domestic consumer market. But as you say, I think the market appreciation under the Trump administration from 2016 and the Biden administration from 2020 is almost exactly the same. I think the S&P 500 is up about 66% under both administrations, which, as you say, is pretty astounding, given you've also thrown a pandemic in there, huge changes in interest rates, huge changes in inflation. But broadly, the outcome has been essentially the same.
Well, it's not been for one big American company, of course, Boeing, James, which has been in a very, very difficult patch over the last 3 or 4 years ago, not least of all because of those 2 dreadful plane crashes. Workers have been out on strike, but it looks like they've accepted a pretty stonkingly good pay deal from at least their side.
Absolutely. I mean, the power was in their hands. They rejected a couple of deals before this one, but it looks like last night they've agreed on a new pay deal, which is a 38% increase over the next 4 years. Also have a big upfront payment. But that hopefully is the first step in the right direction after what you say has been a pretty terrible few years for Boeing. You've had difficulties in terms of management. You've had difficulties in terms of production ramp. But hopefully this is the first step in the right direction. You had a huge equity raise recently as well, which has shored up the balance sheet. But any improvement there should be good, not just for Boeing itself, but the wider supply chain and broader industrial production across the US.
And indeed, just finally on this, James, it should be good for everyone who takes a plane, because effectively we've just got 2 big airline manufacturers in the world, and one of them's been on their knees for the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I mean, you saw that a little bit with some of the comments from Ryanair yesterday. It's not just Boeing which is having its difficulties. You're seeing some difficult period at Airbus as well. But any improvement in that production ramp really would be pretty essential to the broader supply chain across the airline industry.
And just very finally, just going back to the election quickly, James, I suppose one of the things that the markets will not want is uncertainty.
I think that's right. I think it depends on timeframes. I think in the very short term, there's a decent chance we have uncertainty last beyond just today. We've even seen some instances where the Trump mechanism is already starting to file some lawsuits in advance of any result, but it could easily drag on a couple of days. We saw this in 2020. And as you say, we really want to just get past this and have some certainty to the outcome, even if that just ends up being a divided House Congress, which would probably be more of a status quo over the next couple of years than any sweep environment.
James, really appreciate your time and insight this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it from me on Business Live. I'm back at 4:30. Up next, it's Gillian in Washington and Wilf in London. Stay tuned.